Mike, thank you for joining us today. Give us it's been a long time since we last chatted in January, and a lot has taken place since then. Give us your thought on what has transcended in the past couple of months and the plans for the weeks ahead.
Thanks, Chris. Obviously, it's an exciting time of the year to have preseason here, and this group of guys have been chomping at the bit ever since we finished our 2020 season in Columbus, and our staff's been really busy. I always kind of find it ironic when you think about the idea of the off season, because where it is the off season for the players and the coaches, it can be potentially the busiest time of the year for us. So we spent a lot of time evaluating our roster to look and see what areas we needed to freshen up and to improve as we headed into 21, and look to try to build off of a large part of what was a very successful first season. Our expectations are obviously very high for our group, and we're still not resting on our laurels. So to look at what we're able to accomplish in year one, we're also very honest with the fact that it was a truncated season. It was one that obviously had more challenges than any expansion season has seen prior. And, for us, we're excited about getting a full slate of games to be able to evaluate the players we have, to kind of continue to put them under the microscope and to see what we have available. What was really important for us as far as areas of focus was not only to kind of continue to build off the continuity that we developed in year one. You look at the success we had defensively with the record-setting goals against average for an expansion club, but also when you saw the success we had offensively, toward the end of the season, after October 14th, which was Yonder Cadiz's first match away in Houston, we were 8th in the league in goals per game and 3rd in the league in total goals scored. So having, all of our DPs available at the same time really gave us obviously some added punch, especially when you see not only what Yonder added when he arrived as our DP9, but also when you saw what Randall Leal, who was in the top 10 in goal contributions during that stretch from October 14th on, goals and assists combined, as well as Hani Mukhtar's ascension during that period also. We were very excited to kind of see that group continue to kind of grow and evolve. And by adding the likes of a young attacking player like Rodrigo Pinheiro, adding an experienced attacking player like CJ Sapong, to this group of players that really only had 3 starts out of Yonder Cadiz during his time here. Hanwala Bawana, who's a bright prospect, who obviously has gained a lot of notoriety in our league and attention with the U.S. under 23s. To have him really arrive here the last month of the season, not only did you have some important key faces arriving here, but having a full preseason for guys like Yonder and Hanwala. When you think of the significance of the role that Alex Mule played during the course of the season during his arrival, this would be his first preseason here for us as well. So we're very encouraged about the idea of what we built in year one and the continuity that really built as our season went on. And to think about having this whole group together for a full preseason is really exciting.
We'll move on to Drake Hills with the Tennessean.
Hey, good afternoon, Mike.
Hi, Drake.
All right. When you talked about CJ and Rodrigo and some of the guys that Nashville C has brought in, what was the approach due to the fact that you already had some outstanding, as you mentioned, some outstanding performances from Alex Muil, even Daniel Rios, even going into the playoffs? How is this team and what is this team's project in this preseason? How are they going to be incorporated into this team going forward?
Well, good question, Drake. And one word you heard me use an awful lot last year, almost as a theme for us, was the idea of cohesion. And as important as it is to build continuity defensively, you tend to find in the final third of the field, so much of the success that comes down to good attacking teams comes with the opportunity for them to play together and to build up experiences, learning how to play off each other, learning what a player's strengths are. And, we did see this group really grow in leaps and bounds this season went along. And, when you look at how we evolved, when you look at the idea of Gary Smith and I together in USL from our first season in 2018 to our second season in 2019, we really take stock in what that group had as far as its strengths and weaknesses and really add and enhance to that for the 2019 season. I mentioned the USL season or the USL experience because, the 2018 team was able to create scoring chances, but struggled sometimes to finish. And, we went into the 2019 off season, I guess prior to 2019 season, knowing that we had to try to find some capable attacking players who were going to be clinical finishers, and did so that time with Daniel Rios, who is still with us, and Cameron Lancaster. And, for us, we're very excited about the idea of the continued development of guys like Yonder and Randall and Hani. Being able to add a proven quantity in our league like CJ Sapong, someone who's had great success within our league, with Sporting Kansas City, with Philadelphia, and with Chicago, as well as for the U.S. national team. To add a young prospect like Rodrigo Pinheiro, very similar to what I kind of promised to Gary from year 1 to year 2 in USL. Our goal was we'd never be in a situation where we would struggle to be able to score goals ever again. And ultimately, execution comes down to players on the field. But I do feel like where maybe we were cautious in year 1 as far as our roster build, I do feel really good about the fact that heading into season 2, in this project, that we've got the right kind of personnel to be able to not only create, but to finish scoring chances.
We will now return to Tim Sullivan, whose microphone should be working.
Hey, can you hear me this time, Mike?
Yeah, hi, Tim.
Hey, look at me go. You mentioned CJ and Rodrigo there. What was it about those two guys, and then the other 3 guys that you've recently added, Robert Castellanos, Brian Meredith, and, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank now.
Nick Hines?
Yeah, Nick Hines in the last couple of weeks here. What is it about those three guys, in addition to CJ and Rodrigo, did you like and make you want to sign them?
When we look at our scouting approach, one thing that's been really important to us is to identify players that come from leagues that translate to our league. And few in recent years, in regards specifically to South America, have had players come into our league with more success than the Uruguayan Premier League. And Rodrigo has a very strong pedigree when you look at his experiences coming through Penarol's Youth Academy and the opportunities he had at meaningful matches playing in the first division for Danubio. Looking at his youth international experience, we just thought that he had the background and pedigree that translated to our league. And specifically about him as a player, he offered some things that we thought that we definitely needed. And, when you look at how maybe someone like Randall plays when he plays wide, Randall really maybe is like a 10 who comes inside quite a bit, opposed to like someone like Rodrigo, who's an out-and-out winger. Rodrigo's got outstanding pace, running with the ball or without the ball, and is somebody who could be a genuine goal threat, maybe with more direct play, opposed maybe like an indirect winger like Randall. From a CJ standpoint, obviously I'm very familiar with CJ, where we did not work together in Kansas City. Obviously, our paths crossed during the course of the experiences we had in the league, and the group of players that he played with in Kansas City, and specifically the role that he had, he was always somebody who was a threat. And, the idea of being threatening is not just the ability to score goals, which clearly he's done. But to me, when you're threatening, you're somebody who worries somebody else. And I think from a soccer standpoint, when you're a threatening attacking player, you're constantly generating attention because you create problems for opposing defenses. So whether it's in the 18-yard box, whether it's finishing on the ground or in the air, whether it's making runs in behind, penetrating runs, whether it's defensively, pressing the other team, CJ is definitely a threatening player from the standpoint that he can put opposing players under pressure. And he definitely is somebody who can cause problems for opposing defenses. For us, we liked also a theme for us. You've seen an awful lot of different signings we've made about versatility, guys who can play multiple positions and multiple roles in different systems or shapes. CJ is somebody who's had success playing not only centrally as a center forward, as a lone center forward or in a pair, but he's also played wide as a winger also. So I think his ability to be a threat combined with his versatility made him someone that we've coveted for a while. So we're really excited to be able to add CJ. Another interesting piece about CJ, when you look at the attacking impetus of this group that we have, and you look kind of at the profile of that group, most of the players, in our front 4 spots are all fairly young. I think the oldest players in that group are 25, 26 years old. So to add somebody with a little more experience like CJ, where he's in his 30s, the reality is, like some other guys we have in our team, in that same age group, like Anibal or Dax, CJ is one of those guys who's found the fountain of youth, takes great care of his body. He's somebody who plays much younger, and I think really adds a perfect blend to the guys we already have here. The other guys, Tim, you asked about, Robert Castellanos, opposed to maybe looking for someone in that role in the super draft. And, certainly someone like Sondre Norheim can play as a center back as well. Robert's a similar age to a college senior, but has gained really meaningful experiences playing in USL with LA Galaxy 2, with RGV. He's been in and out of the U.S. Youth National Team system. So for us, we like the fact that he comes into the league maybe a little more accelerated than other kids his age. Brian Meredith, when you look at what we're doing with our pool of goalkeepers, Joe Willis was one of the top goalkeepers in MLS last year. We're really excited to be able to bring him back. He's been kind of surrounded by younger goalkeepers and really inexperienced. When you look at Elliot Panico, who we think a lot of and think he's got a high ceiling, but has not kicked the ball in MLS yet. Tor Saunders, who for us, we feel like back-to-back years, we feel like we landed the top goalkeeper in college soccer. Also very young, never kicked the ball in MLS. So to add an experienced goalkeeper like Brian Meredith, somebody who's been in some good teams, has been a good teammate, has been able to be a part of some strong goalkeeping cores, to add someone like that to help maybe alleviate some pressure from Joe, while maybe also help mentoring these young goalkeepers, gives us a big plus. And, and someone like Nick Hines, I think we're really excited about both Nick and Tom Judge to have two good young left backs, guys who fit what we look for in players in that role. And, for me, Daniel Lovitz is as good at, if not the top domestic left back in our league. And when you look at what he does on both sides of the ball, I think both Nick and Tom offer some similar qualities. And, we're hoping maybe can be future heir apparents in that role. Someone like Nick is been an outstanding attacking player as a left back, as a youth player in Seattle Sounders Youth Academy, in college at Akron, and then in Seattle's USL system. And we just think he kind of fits what we look for in a player in that role.
Thank you, Mike. We'll continue with a question from Chris Harris for Channel for NBC4.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Good, Chris. How are you?
Good, good. My question is, given that this is basically the 1-year anniversary of the team's first ever MLS game, like looking back, how would you rate how you guys handled everything thrown at you in that first year, and how did it maybe, I don't know, make you stronger or better prepared for kind of what you're facing this year?
Chris, when you look back at this last year, literally, no club in any sport in their expansion year has had to deal with what we had to this last year. Not just a global pandemic that affected not only every sports team, every franchise, but obviously every person. But when you think about specifically being here in Nashville and having two different tornadoes, we had our season delayed when we had to withdraw from the MLS's back tournament. We had 3 different games that had rain delays of over an hour. It's just when we talk about the guiding principles for our club and our staff, one of the most important ones is resiliency. And when you look back in this last year, I think not only the success our team had on the field, but the ability to demonstrate that kind of resiliency by dealing with the adversity that really no club's been asked to do before that has created a tremendous foundation for this club going forward. We talk a lot as a staff among ourselves about not only not resting on the laurels of a successful expansion season, but also not forgetting about what things we had to work through this past year. They should stand as an important reminder for us about not only what we can deal with and absorb, but how we can respond positively in that kind of adversity. And for us, I think where it was a successful season to be able to advance in the playoffs in year one, the fact that we were able to persevere through that kind of adversity, to demonstrate that kind of resiliency, it's going to provide a foundation for years to come for this club.
Ben Wright with Broadway Sports with the next question.
Hey, Mike, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, man.
So looking at your roster right now, I mean, it's filling up pretty quickly, and there doesn't appear to be a ton of open roster spots. So, I mean, without giving away too much, are there plans to potentially move players out to make room for new signings, super draft picks coming into the roster? And then related, I mean, it feels like now you're kind of have the luxury of having quite a few options at striker going into the season that you didn't have last year. So how do you and Gary plan to rotate those minutes and get guys on the field and see who can find some form?
So some good questions, Ben. And, first off, what I would say is, and we talk a lot during the course of the year, and I know you appreciate, we're always trying to strengthen and improve our roster. And, it'd be unfair to talk about, the guys who are currently here coming into preseason, where they all fit in the whole scheme of things, the reality is there's always moving pieces, moving parts. And, the group of players that we brought in through the super draft, the idea of having them stay with their college teams this spring, we looked at it almost like a de facto loan to those NCAA teams. The reality is, our first official practice is on Wednesday. Some of these guys have already played 2 college matches. They just wouldn't have gotten games like that, not playing 90 minutes, not playing meaningful games, had they come into preseason and been, essentially tackling dummies, for most of the next 6 to 8 weeks. So for us, getting these guys more matches, I think you guys can all appreciate, and the idea of the college season. And look, I coached in college for over 20 years, and the reality is when the traditional college season ends November, December, when the traditional MLS preseasons start in January, most of these college kids aren't really in game shape. And ironically, they're not, even at the age they're at, as young as they are, they're probably not match fit or as fit enough as they have to be because of how long they've been off. So our thoughts were, by having these guys arrive here in late April, early May, maybe only missing, 8 weeks of preseason, 6 weeks of preseason, the first week's regular season, they'll actually come in probably in better shape, not only physically, but even just like technically or tactically, than probably most college kids would in a normal year. So our thought was, where they might miss a critical phase of, their development and training with our group in preseason, we think to get more meaningful games, and it's a more positive experience having them stay with their college teams in the spring. As far as the significance of those college kids, every club is different. And, what I can say for us, until our academy can regularly populate our roster with homegrown players, we're always going to place maybe a different level of focus or emphasis in the college draft. And we feel strongly with the fact that you can identify players can help your roster. I think, when you see what guys like Alistair Johnson did last year, I think it demonstrates that. Saying that, I think it's unfair to expect us to pull an Alistair Johnson or a Jack Mayer out every year. The reality is, that the penalty of having a successful season this last year is we were selecting 20th, rather than selecting second. I've said jokingly, I hope we never draft second ever again, because, we hope we're playing a lot longer in the season or a lot later in the season. But, for us, we do feel like we acquired some players that can help our group. And the reality is some of those guys, we get a chance to stay straight away and be a part of this group when they arrive. Some of these guys will probably need more like a finishing type experience in USL, and probably get loaned out. So it'll be case by case by those guys as far as who will stick around here during the 21 season, who will go to USL. What I would tell you is, I think it's interesting when you follow Major League Baseball and you hear the idea of a player getting demoted down to the minors. For those of you who follow, football all over the world, you tend to find when players get loaned out, it's usually the opposite of a demotion. Usually you're loaning a player because you value them enough that you want to get them games. And the experience I would use of someone like Luke Hackison last year, who, we drafted him in the 4th round last year, had such a promising season in Charlotte that he came back now as a signed player on our roster. So the reality is, if you see players getting loaned out, it is not a demotion, it's the exact opposite. It's because we see some of these guys, potentially as part of the future of this club. And, we think that getting them some games at a more meaningful level, playing against men, an experience in USL is only going to help them come back maybe in 22. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw both of those. As far as your second question about the competition up front, that word I use is really important because, one thing Gary always stresses to me is how critical he thinks competition is to get the best out of players. So from his perspective, he's never concerned about having a logjam of players. I mentioned last year how things went. I mean, we had to play 3 matches last year. We had no center forwards. When we were using players like Derek Jones as a false 9, or guys like Randall or Alex up front. The reality is we went into this offseason making sure that we were not going to be in a situation ever again where we were going to have a shortage of players in those roles, specifically in the 9 role. And I think we feel really good about the fact, as I mentioned, someone like CJ who could not only play as center forward, but can also play wide as well, that we've created not only good competition up front, but some depth there as well.
Thank you, Mike. We will continue with a question from Tom Boger with Major League Soccer.
Hey, Mike, nice to speak with you. Hope all is well.
Hey, Tom. Thanks.
I guess just a simplistic question with preseason starting here, but the transfer window obviously still open for a little while. Are you, let's say, done with the primary work in this window, or would you expect, I guess, more to come?
Tom, it's a great question. What I would tell you is we have worked very hard in maintaining roster flexibility, having, open roster spots on our senior roster, having open international spots, even though obviously we sold a couple of those, having enough allocation money to give us put us in a position where, depending on what Gary's needs are in preseason, whether it's adding someone short term, with the next month or two, versus waiting until summer window, we have the roster flexibility, the cap flexibility, and the assets to add other players. To your question, what I would tell you is, for me, I always like the idea of using this time of the year for evaluation, taking inventory and kind of taking stock of what you have and what you don't have. And I think where it's easy looking as magnets on a board, I joke with our guys here that, come preseason, we take all these magnets and kind of hand them to Gary, and now he puts them in the field. And for us, I think it's an encouraging time of the year to kind of see what we have, but also to see what we don't have. We might need to try to freshen up, be it during this window, the primary window, or during the summer window.
Drake Hills with a follow-up question.
Yeah, Mike, we've been talking about, obviously, the players that have been coming in this offseason, but obviously for some that were a part of the inaugural season, someone like Eric Miller, what's his future with Nashville SC? I know that at the end of the year, there were some MLS contract negotiations. What's the latest on Eric Miller?
Chris, can I comment about that?
Yeah, we will be making announcements on those decisions later in the month, Drake, so stay tuned. With that, we'll move on to a question from Chris Harris.
There we go. Mike, last year when practices resumed, it was kind of in phases based on COVID protocols as far as what you could do and how many. With stuff starting up this Wednesday, what are the protocols and limitations?
Chris, it's funny that you asked that. Last year, we always talk about the fact that we really had 3 preseasons. When you think that we started in January, we resumed before the MLS is Back tournament, and we had a third one when we came back from the MLS is Back tournament. Right now, as far as the COVID protocols, there is a heavy sensitivity to close contact. So whether it's maintaining 6 feet in a locker room and players wearing masks whenever they're not on the field. And, our players test every other day during the course of the season. So, we probably are more conscious of the safety protocols this time of year than ever before. It's amazing. I was, driving into the office and listening to a commercial for an advert for an ESPN 30 for 30 talking about March 11th, 2020, how that was the date, I guess, of the first game that was postponed for COVID. It's amazing to think where we are right now in the world, a year later. And I think knowing what we can experience last year, it's given us good reference point to draw from as far as how to keep our players and staff in the best possible position, not only to succeed on the field, but also to be safe off of it.
We'll continue with another follow-up question from Tim Sullivan.
Hey, Mike. At least half of this might be answered in a similar way to the one that Drake just asked. But you've mentioned potential green card situations in the past. Do you expect to have those announcements ready by the start of the season? And then another roster nerd question. You know how I am. Are you, from a league rule standpoint, are you expecting the NCAA players to have to fit into the 30-man roster as it stands right now, or is that something that there's flexibility with?
That's good questions. Chris, the first one?
Yeah, those are questions that we'll probably announce closer to the roster compliance date at the beginning of the season, because as Mike can allude, there's some flexibility with how we operate with different roster transactions. So hang in there with us as we finalize those details.
Tim, for the second one, I would tell you that we've been pretty calculated about how many reserve minimum spots we were going to leave open for super draft players for this 2021 season. And, there's also a mechanism the league has instituted this year to make it more user-friendly for college players, knowing the nature of having to play this spring season opposed to the traditional season, where in the past, we've always had a 31st player we can roster and go on season-long loan to the USL. That was Luke Hackison last year. Not only do we still have a 31st player, we're also going to allow us to sign essentially a 32nd and 33rd player as a concept that allow you to sign those players to MLS contracts and either have them stay in market training, but not on the active roster, or the players that you can loan to USL. So I think that kind of flexibility based on the uniqueness of COVID in the college season, for at least the impression we're given right now is for at least for 1 year, having those extra roster spots to be able to sign those players, what we take into account as we look at kind of how we utilize these college players and how we find a home for them.
We have another follow-up from Ben Wright, and then we'll close today's availability. Drake, I'm not sure if this is a previous question, but if you still have a follow-up, you're allowed to follow after Ben's question.
Mike, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, just about going into the offseason with the goal of not struggling to score goals. And we saw, I would say, a real uptick in offensive production towards the end of the season. With the new signings that you brought in and based on kind of that better form to close out the year, what are your expectations and kind of what do you hope to see just numbers wise from this team going forward this year? Do you have a goal in mind?
Ben, it's funny. I remember talking to you, it's interesting comparing like the USL experience year 1 and year 2. And I remember talking to you, I think at the end of the first year in USL, and we talked about creating chances versus finishing chances. Whether I have a number or not that I think this group has to hit, we obviously benchmark them, and we spend a lot of time working on KPIs, on key performance indicators. I think it'd be unfair for me to give numbers out expectations, because I don't want to certainly box players or the staff into corners. But what I would tell you, maybe rather than like a hard number that we're saying you must hit or not hit for goals scored, I just feel like maybe similar to a conversation we might have had years ago, after year 1 USL. I think my expectation is that we're going to create chances this year at no worse the same level that we created, the last month of the MLS season, which was really, really encouraging. You have objective and you have subjective, and it's not like it's my opinion. I mean, it's fact. We were scoring, significantly more goals in that last month of the season, compared not only to our team the first half of the season, but the rest of the league. So our expectation is to maintain those standards, with more players now, in the fray that can help create and finish scoring chances.
We'll finish up with Drake. One final question from him.
Yeah, Mike. I mean, I was wanting to get to know maybe behind the scenes and what it was like constructing this preseason. Obviously, the pandemic and the coronavirus isn't going to surprise you this year compared to last year. You talked about the 3 different preseasons from 2020. What was it like being able to orchestrate, trying to schedule not only the preseason games, but just the overall training calendar for this team in 2021?
Drake, it's a great question. And it's an interesting perspective because, there's so much uncertainty. Look, we still don't have our game schedule yet, for 21, so, the idea of being able to pivot, to be flexible, I think it's something that we all learned as a staff. And I have to give a lot of credit to our team administrator, Jeff Robin, who I think did a really good job helping us be flexible and resourceful when we found out that we can go from spending our entire preseason market, which was the intended expectations, to then being permitted to travel. And both Jeff and Gary worked really diligently in trying to see what this team needs to get ready for preseason. And then for us, it was helping try to execute that. And, the idea of spending time in market, especially early on in preseason, even though most clubs travel during the first phase of preseason traditionally, I don't think it's too challenging to be in market, because it's usually usually you would have 2 phases of preseason. Maybe the first phase would be, 2.5, 3 weeks, and your second phase would be 2.5, 3 weeks with a break in between. We're doing this kind of in 3 phases. And the first phase traditionally really is about you. It's about your team. It's about getting fitter, developing more cohesion, working on things. Look, Gary is an outstanding teacher when you think about team tactics, as well as just a man manager and a coach on the sidelines. And that first phase, I think, is super important for him to spend time with his team. So opposed to doing that in Florida, last year we played one match during that first phase, like our last night. We're really going to kind of mirror that from the standpoint that we'll spend 2.5 weeks here, really with intensive training with the group from a fitness standpoint, a tactical standpoint. We'll play one match against a USL club and the last night before we go down to Bradenton. The second phase, so it'll be 3 phases rather than 2. The second phase will be match heavy. So, that this group in a 2-week period will play 4 matches, probably like Wednesday, Saturday. And it seems like a lot, but, as Chris kind of touched on earlier, when you think about everything we went through last year, I mean, this group probably now is used to playing 2 games a week. But, this time of year also, and the analogy I use an awful lot is kind of like in baseball with a pitch count. For those of you who follow the NBA, I know it's like a 4-letter word when people talk about like load management, but, the reality is you get really sensitive when you look at guys like Alex Whelan, Dax McCarty or Annabelle Godoy, guys who can run 9, 10, 11 miles in a game over 90 minutes. It's really hard to ask guys to do that twice in a week. And I think this stage of the season, you see a lot of a rotation, not only from one game to game, but, I think it would not be uncommon to see, Gary play almost in waves, different combinations of players for 30 minutes at a time, building to 45 minutes at a time, building to 60 minutes at a time. And then, when we come back from that second phase, we'll have a third phase here. It'll be 2 weeks. So usually we have 1 week when we come back from Bradenton to the start of regular season. This year we'll have 2 weeks. So we'll play one more game, either here in market or away the week before the season starts. But, to go from not knowing what we were going to do as far as where we could go in market or out of market, to then being able to go out of market, to be resourceful and flexible, to have, people like Gary and Jeff work so hard to try to find a way to accommodate what we need to do as far as getting matches out of market, which is very hard to do in market when you think there's not a lot of teams in proximity that you can play. So to be able to go to Florida and play those games, come back here, I think it really gives Gary everything he needs to have the right amount of time with his team to be ready for the regular season.
And I'm going to apologize, Mike, because I did miss a question from our very own Wes Bowling in the process. So if we have a couple more minutes, Wes, the floor is yours.
Hey, Mike, I'll be quick. Just interested in a window into your collaboration with Gary as you evaluate talent and make signings. I know your relationship with him is longstanding now, and you've mentioned before that you collaborate very closely with him on such things. When it came to these signings and other decisions you've made personnel-wise, what is his role in that process?
Hey, Wes, that's a great question. I think when you look at whether it's our sport or other sports, when you have a general manager or sporting director and a manager or head coach where they don't work together in that process, it's almost always a recipe for failure. For us, we feel really strongly about the fact that we're just never going to sign anybody unless Gary feels good about them. So when this process first starts, even before we start presenting players to Gary, we've got a really good idea about positional profiles. Gary sits down with Chance Myers and our scouting staff, Oliver Miller-Farrell and our analytics department, and we look really closely at, what things Gary looks for in certain positions on the field. You take someone like Rodrigo, where he really can play, really any of the front 4 spots, but primarily like as a direct winger. We ask Gary, what are the qualities he's looking for, in a player in that role, technically, tactically, physically, and psychologically. And, the reality is there's thousands of players all over the world that present to Gary, but rather than have a player that you might rate or I might rate, to me, it's, it matters less about like what we like and more about what fits the profile that Gary's looking for in a specific position. And to me, once we know what the attributes are he's looking for in a player, it then allows, guys like Chance and Oliver in their departments to be able to scrub lists of players that they have, either that they've been tracking, guys they have data on, that they think best fit the profile of what a player looks like that Gary's looking for in that role. So for us, we know, Chance might come to me with 5 or 10 players. We then go to Gary maybe with 3 or 5 players. But by the time it gets to Gary, we've got a really good idea, I think, about what he's looking for in a player in that role. And I would say at that point, that's where you look at Gary and say, look, now based on these handful of players, which player or players do you think best fits what you're looking for? And for us, we're looking at, specifically about someone like Rodrigo, he just fit the profile we're looking for in a winger in our team. So for those of you that have followed NSC for a while and have watched what things that, that we try to add in certain roles, that could probably give you some insight to kind of what Rodrigo looks like. not just like physically or his height and weight, but as far as the attributes he has. So, Gary is intricately involved in that process.